Hello, and welcome to this very special conversation for the Silver Tent. And I am thrilled to be hosting this. I'm Karen Kennaby, founder of Elevate, and I'm hosting this special conversation between Stewart Pearce and Francesca Cassini. Francesca is the founder of the Silver Tent, and obviously most of you that are going to be watching and listening to this obviously know her well, but I feel that it might actually go beyond that. So this is who Francesca is. And Stewart Pearce is globally renowned voice coach and angel emissary, and he was the confidential coach, voice coach, and presence coach for Diana, Princess Diana. And that really is what is bringing this conversation together today. This is a conversation about love, not wishy-washy love, not fluffy, airy love, but deep, deep love in action. And both of you, in your own unique ways, both embody that and bring that to life through all the work that you do. And the reason that this conversation occurred is because of something that happened for you, Francesca, a few months ago when you were tuning into your muse. And Diana came through for you, which was a great surprise, I know, because she wasn't heavily present in your life. Could you take us back to what actually happened?
Oh, I would love to, Karen. Thank you. Thank you so much. I've been tuning into my muse for something like ten years. And she turns up in one of two guises, but the main one is this tall, skinny woman in black leathers with her Harley Davidson and a little black cheroot in her mouth. So she's kind of completely the opposite to me, tall and skinny and like really in your face. And that's who I'm used to turning up. And I wanted to tune into uh, the Silver Tent and really what it was about now, because it's been going for this is last summer. So this was 8 years, coming up to 8 years. So I tuned in to this deep meditation to meet my muse and ask her what the new upgraded theme for the Silver Tent would be. What's its focus now? And I was really surprised when she didn't look at all like my muse normally does. She looked like Princess Diana on her wedding day with that amazing wedding dress. And like I'd never really felt particularly connected to Diana in any way. So she's not somebody that I would like invoke. I wouldn't consciously invoke her presence. But she came up to me and she kissed me on my forehead. And I had the most, oh, I can feel it now, the most incredible moment. And I realized that she didn't have a message to give me. She was the message. Like she was the symbolism that I needed to unravel. And I was deeply, deeply touched that she would arrive there, and so it was an incredibly really deep, heartfelt moment. I'm sure that I must have been like really weeping at this because it felt so very sacred. And then it took me maybe a couple of days to unravel in one sentence what it was that she wanted the new message of the Silver Tent to be, because it used to be about because we're all women over 50, 60, 70 and beyond. It used to be more focused on our wisdom, that we have wisdom worth sharing. But what came through from Diana is actually that we're about creating ripples of influence, shifting the global culture to one of love. And I mean, it's transformed how I feel about what we're doing, because now it feels much more inclusive and radiant, really. So yeah, it was amazing.
Wow, that's so touching.
It was, yes, very. And then she turned up for me just about 40 minutes ago. I tuned into our call today, and she turned up just completely out of the blue. I wasn't expecting it at all. Um, in that amazing photograph when she's working in the nursery before she was married, with the skirt that you can see through, and there she was with the child on her hip, and just this sense of playfulness and fun, and it was just lovely. So yeah.
Well, she's here, isn't she? I mean, she's here right now. We can feel her. Absolutely extraordinary, you know. Just as she was, I was here when I wrote the book. I was in this study, in this apartment in London. And it was the force of circumstance that moved me to write the book because, as you know, I had a completely confidential relationship. Nobody really knew except for one or two chosen guardians of darling Diana, one of them being somebody who was rather like a mother figure to her in the form of Mara Burney, who owned San Lorenzo restaurant in Knightsbridge, which is no longer, who alas is, you know, in spirit as well. And Mara introduced me. Mara was sort of a patroness of mine, so she introduced me to Diana. She orchestrated the whole thing. And so Mara was really the go-between, you know, because there were certain precepts that I wanted to adhere to so that our relationship didn't become part of the circus that was around Diana at that time. Anyway, to cut a long story short, my agent, my literary agent, said to me, "Well, why don't you write a book about Diana?" And I said, "No, I'm never doing that." And so Susan was very very artful. She talked me through to calm me down. And suddenly Diana came through. And the extraordinary thing was that I had a whole series of very important public engagements that were a series of very, very powerful corporate seminars, both in the United Kingdom, in other parts of Europe, and also in the United States, finalizing at the UN. And they were all cancelled and postponed to another time. And so here I was, footloose and fancy free, thinking, well, that's nice. Thank you very much, universe. So, who's going to pay the rent? And and suddenly Diana came through, and the book just wrote itself. She was with me for, you know, 3 or 4 months in getting the skeleton and the muscle of the book together. So she is here, and just meeting you and hearing your story, because viewers, this is the first time that darling Karen has actually recommended this wonderful meeting, and this is the first time that I've actually met Francesca, and hearing you speak, so many vital pointers, you know, the sort of the dots or the breadcrumbs have all suddenly connected
Oh, wow.
about the nature of what the book is really all about, which I know you're touching into, Diana, the Voice of Change, which is a force from Diana for the women of the world.
Yes. As I was reading it, it was like, wow. I couldn't, you know, these are things that you can't make up
Yeah,
beforehand, can
yeah,
you?
yeah.
Those connections, the synchronicities, the synergy of it, and just the opportunity to be sharing this wisdom. And I love the way that you've written about her in the book. It's so easy to read. It's very it's like everything is approachable in there, isn't it? There's no, in fact, it's the way that I sense that she related or relates, actually, current tense, I guess,
Yes,
relate to people. That's how it is. It's relatable, easy to take on. It's great.
yeah, yeah.
This is the book, incidentally, just in case anybody hasn't.
Put it on
You've
my
got your Kindle.
You've got you've got the original copy, and this is the second edition that came to commemorate her 25th year. Ah, and I signed it for her.
Yes. And I agree, because it brings together, you know, there are two aspects to this conversation, aren't there? There's Diana's influence and legacy, and then there's engaging our own voices of change and how those two weave together through her influence and through Stewart's connection. So, what was your impression when you first met her, Stewart? because obviously you'd had connections that are slightly removed, but not totally removed distance. But when you first met her and she reached out to work with you, what was your first sense?
Well, the first meeting was a setup, and it was a setup by Mara, who was the restaurateur of San Lorenzo. She recommended and introduced me to a number of very significant people in the world whose names will remain anonymous, but very, very powerful, powerful people. And so she said, I want you to come for lunch. There's somebody I want you to meet. And I said, who is it? And she said, just come for lunch. And because her cooking was just so extraordinary, I mean, Mara was renowned that the Stones, meaning the Rolling Stones, would call her after a concert at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, Mara, can you make us spaghetti? And she would get up and make them spaghetti, and the boys would go and eat spaghetti. I mean, she was extraordinary. She was an extension of the Divine Mother.
Mm.
So I arrived at the restaurant for lunch, and of course, immediately I walked into the foyer. There was Pepe, the head waiter, the MD, the majordomo, and I said, "Who am I meeting?" He said, "You'll soon find out." Oh, and I said, "Well, where is Madam?" Meaning they all called Mara Madam. She's down in the salon privé downstairs. So of course I went down feeling full of trepidation. Who am I going to meet? And I knocked on the door and opened the door, and there was Diana and there was Mara. And Diana, my first impression of Diana was that I dove into, as our American friends would say, I dove into those blue eyes, these huge blue eyes that met mine in absolute candor, in absolute honesty, and in absolute love. And she grabbed hold of my arm. She said, "You will work with me, won't you?" I mean, what can I say? No.
No, that wasn't going to happen.
I said, let's talk about it. Let's now talk about it. And firstly, I need you to know that this is beyond an honor meeting you, because we had met many years ago before she married Charles at a garden party at Buckingham Palace, because I've always had those connections. And it was, she was still so virgin-like, and here was this mature woman 15 whatever years later, and it was breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. But one of the things, after a few moments of gathering myself and centering myself, I'm in this conversation with two very remarkable women, one of them being Diana, Princess of Wales. What I became aware of immediately was her acute intelligence. But it was a quality of intelligence that is unusual to us. It was not an intelligence that was book learned or cerebral or academic. It was an intelligence that was purely of the heart. So it was an empathic intelligence, something that I refer to as being not cerebral consciousness, but metaphoric consciousness. It was really the language of the soul, that feeling was the language of the soul. But her level of perspicacity and her perception about people and about events and what she wanted to do, because the Martin Bashir interview, the famous BBC Panorama interview, had just come out. And that was the sort of under those auspices. That's why we were meeting, because she was absolutely enraptured by what she said, the courage that it took for her to say those things with Martin Bashir. But she didn't like the way she looked. She found all of that, well, actually, there are three people in this. She wanted to gain something which was infinitely more full of gravitas and weight. She didn't feel that she was fully embodied, but at the same time, she was very awakened within her body, because she wanted to be a dancer. We knew that she wouldn't as a young woman, but she became sportif, so she went to the gym every day. And if Diana didn't swim 45 lengths a day, she felt crazed, and she was a Cancer, so she was a water sign, she was a water baby. So she was very alive in her body, but at the same time, obviously, she had the residue of all of those toxins to do with low self-esteem, to do with the fact that she was constantly being put down. She never thought that she was a victim, but she was very aware of the fact that she was victimized. So it was this quality of acute intelligence that really touched me so deeply. And I knew immediately this is somebody I can work with. And of course, we liked each other enormously. We had fun. God, did we have fun. Right to the last meeting, which was just a few days before her passing, when she came to me for a session full of the Versace funeral, full of what was happening between her and Dodie, and full on, not that she was in love with Dodie, but she was having a fantastic time with Dodie because he was in love with her. It was one of the first times that she had somebody, a partner on her arm, who was just loving her unconditionally and who was warm and cuddly and sexy and sensual and had a lot of money, so that she could be secure with him, is what I mean by he had a lot of money, because being Princess Diana was difficult in terms of that security aspect. And it was the last meeting, and I remember she said, "We must write a book about all that we've done together." And then we started talking about where she was going. And I have to say that something happened deep within me where my solar plexus thudded into my pelvis, and I almost broke into tears, which was something that we would often do together because we were just so heart opened. And I realized that was a presentiment of what was going to happen. And then, of course, 7 days later or something, the awful news came.
Mm.
And it took me years and years to get over it.
I can imagine. I can imagine. There must be such intimacy in the kind of relationship that you had with her, or that you would have with your clients, because of what you're doing. And so I can just really sense how close you. Well, I can feel it in the book anyway. It's really obvious how close the two of you became.
Mm.
Bless you. Yes, it was very extraordinary and very different from all of her other relationships, in the sense of the curators of her life. I mean, for example, Paul, who was really Paul Burrell, who was her butler, who looked after all of the household details. And because Diana was always very perspicacious about the nature of the fact that she felt that she was always being followed, or that she would use her cell phone, because cell phones were really coming in at that time. This was 95, 96, 97, that she would hear a click on her cell phone, which she was very suspicious of. So there was a great deal of, I won't go into the stories now, but there were many stories about her being followed late at night in her car. And she was a superb driver. So she could drive very, very fast, but always immensely grounded. But how she was chased and how her brakes failed and all sorts of terrible things. Um, so I was another aspect, I guess, of curatorial nature, of guiding her in the supremacy of what her role was all about as an iconic world figure, to come forth as the being that she wanted to be internally, but also to be able to conduct herself equitably on the outside of her being, to be very grounded, to be very direct, to not always respond to the shyness that had been the crippling devices in the early part of her life, that there was always that lovely sensitivity, which was very warm, but what we did was to transform it into grace, helped, of course, by other remarkable people like Mother Teresa, because Diana had two very remarkable experiences with Mother Teresa, and also with the nuns within the hospice in Calcutta.
I love what's coming through for me is the power of her decision to elevate herself, to come and find you, to ask for your help, and to know, not just know what she wanted to create and do on such a big stage, but to go for it. I mean, it sounds like she just really went for it. And I mean, what she created is astonishing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there was this wonderful opportunity that she seized with all her might, because she'd been through so many years of exorcism. When I say exorcism, I really mean, going deep into the shadows inside, the demons inside, and really identifying all of them and releasing them. She'd been through many, many years of interrogating her emotional body, so to speak. So she was already beginning to move to that state of centeredness or that state of beginning serenity, as we see, because it would literally pulse through every pore of her being. So her aura would always be absolutely there. The one thing about Diana, which I think you really touched on at the beginning of our conversation, was this ordinariness. And yet she was extraordinary at the same time, created by the role that we put her into, that the world put her into, which she was very aware of, but only as a role of service. And so she realized that the extraordinary thing about her was that she could be totally ordinary, and that by being that personalized, she became universal.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? That I love that combination of ordinary and extraordinary, and I think that we all have that as a potential. But just thinking about Diana and the way that she spoke to people and communicated with people, something I've been learning is this difference between the transactional kind of engagement that's a very masculine energy, isn't it, and that relational way of engaging that was so very much Diana. And what I realized earlier today is to be able to have such deep relational engagement, you have to see the other person as equal. And that's what she did so brilliantly, wasn't it? Was she never put herself above somebody else. And they all clearly felt that intensely, that they were considered or experienced and spoken with as an equal.
Yeah.
So I can just sense that incredible, I guess, inspiration, but lift up.
Yeah.
That she gave so many.
And ironically, I believe that state, because I completely concur with what you're saying, I believe that state grew because the sense of entitlement that she was born into, after all, the Spencer family is one of the oldest noble heritages of the aristocratic lineage and goes way, way back. I mean, infinitely more noble than the Windsor family, interestingly, although they're the hegemony. And because of the awful breakup between her mother and her father when she was so young, that terrible schism brought her into this earthedness of really sorting out all of that sense of entitlement that we often see in aristocratic personalities or in the upper middle classes. So much is taken for granted about their status. We can see that, for example, in the downfall of Prince Andrew, which is so unfortunate, because I remember him as a child and he was a wonderful buddy to have, for the short times as a small child, I played with him. I mean, I'm slightly older than he. But unfortunately, it's gone somewhat awry. If only he also had been shattered in that way. Not that I would evoke that in anybody's life, but the desperation leads us to what our soul really is all about. Who are we? Not what are we, but in terms of status, as you were saying, on the secular level, the formal level, but who are we? And that was what was so remarkable about Diana, that she was able to go totally into this integral nature of herself purely because she cared and lived the truth of do as you would be done by.
Very potent.
That comes through very, very clearly in the book. Yeah. Very, very clearly in the book, doesn't it? And it's interesting because as I've got older, I've come to realize we do all have to have this stage of everything breaking down and everything cracking apart, that whole chasm. But for her, it was so early in her life. And for most of us, this is something that happens way, way later as a result of life experiences, relationship experiences, and awakening. But for her to have had this at such a very young age was obviously very formative.
Yeah, absolutely. And the really interesting thing is, I haven't thought about these things for a long time. So thank you for evoking the wonder of Diana within me. I mean, the multi details that I have within my consciousness about her. That one of the really remarkable conversations that I had around the time that I started writing the book was with Diana's astrologer, Debbie Frank, who became a good friend of mine. And Debbie, in fact, wrote the foreword and then actually did this wonderful synthesis of Diana's chart. And what Debbie was able to do is to go deep into the way that someone's psyche is within the blueprint of their birth chart. And so Debbie was able to really identify what that schism was all about, what that disintegration process was all about, and that it led her to a non-corporeal meeting with her spirit guides, who, of course, was the Divine Mother, surprise, surprise, in all of her, from an archetypal point of view, in all her varying guises, Mary the Magdalene, Kuan Yin, etc., etc. And although Diana was very grounded and was never ever moving into that surfeit that is often with our moving into the preternatural or the supernatural world where everything becomes very woo woo. She was never woo woo. She was very grounded about it because she had so many unusual, phenomenal experiences and wasn't actually able to fully understand them until we really met and then I was able to put it all together. Not that she hadn't at the beginning of her career with the royal family, not that she hadn't sought out psychics, because we all know that members of the royal family go and see psychics and mediums to understand more about how they can resolve problems or, institute change or whatever in their lives. But Diana was very ample, I think mostly through seeing Madame Vassar. That was all very unfortunate. There was Sarah Ferguson sent Diana to because they were great friends at one particular time, and then of course Madame Vassar sold all of the stories to the dailies, and
Mm.
so we Diana began to learn what boundaries were all about, and that she couldn't just keep spilling out everywhere, which is what her tendency was through joy, through fun, through play. She played so easily, but also through this inordinate love that she had for everybody. Very remarkable.
Do you think that, um, I mean, I think you hint at, or talk about destiny in the book, about her destiny. But did she believe that she was born specifically for this path that she took?
Yes, I mean, in the maturity of our meeting, which was in her mid 30s, she was becoming more mature from that point of view and recognized. She was highly self-inquired and read a lot of holistic, all mind, body, spirit books about past lives, about mediumship, about the sacred icons that we can hold dear to us to develop and evolve our belief, faith, and trust in the fact that there is a divine energy that is this supernal force that if we have faith will always guide us. We can water that down or make it easier to say, well, the universe is there, so let's let the universe help, let go and let God in. She was very aware of this. So she talked a lot about destiny, but, through the detached experience that I had in serving her, I was actually able to identify very acutely because I was just slightly older and slightly more experienced, that I was awake as a child to spirit, to the multidimensional universe, and found it very difficult to be here in 3D. But obviously, I found my way, otherwise, I wouldn't be here. But it was very, very challenging. So I experienced a tremendous amount of suffering through my childhood. Was fortunately very loved by an extraordinary mother who was a paragon of unconditional love. So she was always there grounding me. My problem were the men because they just wanted to beat me up. And I couldn't achieve things as a child that many children could. And this was all to do with the fact that I'm profoundly dyslexic. And I was experiencing something which we now call is synesthesia. So I have a crossover of the senses. So I, for example, was seeing sound I was hearing, but seeing sound first, and then hearing it, and then feeling it in my body. So when it came to reading, it was very difficult because we were doing tour. The cat sat on the mat, and as far as I was concerned, sound was always conducting itself, as it were, through these extraordinary waves of consciousness that were all light waves with sound harmonics within them. So I would literally surf on these sound waves. The angels showed me how to do that. Now, of course, in my maturity, I found ways of being able to conduct sensible conversations with supernatural beings through that force. But it took some time in growing in 3D through the 60s and, discovering sexuality and da 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 da. And being odd, not being able to fit in, it took time to really ground all of that. So I had uh, this prior experience of conducting reasonable relationships with supernatural or archetypal features like, do you feel that you're called to greatness? And of course, the first marker of that was the family that she was born into, being one of the oldest noble lineages of European aristocracy, going all the way back, as I mentioned in the book, all the way back to the Merovingian peoples, which possibly goes all the way back to Yeshua and Mary Magdalene.
Mm.
However, that's up for grabs.
I know that I'm not interviewing you and we're in conversation, but there's a question just burning to come out, Stewart, which is, even though you were her coach, did you feel you changed through your relationship with her?
Oh, it was a great turning point in my life. Yes, it was a great turning point. It was a turning point in the sense of it allowed me to feel a development of immense security within who I am. Um, because I was brought up in a very august situation, because my dad worked for the British royal family. And so I was brought up in all of that. But I was made to feel that I was about this big. I was constantly told, you are nothing and you will always be nothing. So I had huge insecurity. I also had a very big personality. I'm very gregarious by nature. So I would sort of bumble along. And I mean, theatre was the best place to be because it was all about being somebody else, but actually being somebody else truthfully. And my love of words, my love of poetry, my love of the bard led me into Mr. Shakespeare with the Royal Shakespeare Company. And I was immediately looked after by very remarkable people, such as the voice director of the Royal Shakespeare Company, Cicely Berry, whom, those of us, Judi Dench and Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart, Ben Kingsley, all these mature actors of today will say that Cis gave them their voices. She was very remarkable, very remarkable. And indeed, when I moved from being an actor at the end of the 70s, which is another long story which I won't go into because of our sharing about Diana, but what happened was that I needed to leave a major job in the States to come back to nurse my mother, who was suddenly pronounced as having 3 months to live through cancer. And our father had died slightly prior, just 3 years prior. So I let the job go, which was making a film. I mean, being in a film, and came back to the United Kingdom and nursed her, and she stayed on for a year, and then she went. And at the end of that, it was a question of, oh God, now what do I do? And the telephone rang out of nowhere, and everything went into slow motion. And here was Cicely, saying, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm not doing anything. I'm just being this." And she said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "I don't know." And she said, "For God's sake, come and teach for me." And I said, and she said, "Oh, for God's sake, you're a natural. And there's someone I want you to go and work with. I don't want to work with her because I'm a diehard socialist. And she's just taken over the Tory party." And so a week later, I was walking into Downing Street to meet Margaret Thatcher.
Well, it sounds like the combination of you and Princess Diana was perfect for you both.
It was an extraordinary time. Yes, it was an extraordinary time to see her come in, so to speak, meaning into her state of empowerment and recognizing that she didn't need the trappings of the establishment of royalty, that she was she was a stuff buster, she was a systems buster, that she'd come, and this was a legitimate role, and that she'd come to do these extraordinary works. And the projects that she would have gone on to be charitably, particularly vis-a-vis the film industry of Hollywood, were remarkable. The things that she had planned, which of course have not come to fruition. Although, to a certain extent, Harry remembers, and in his conjunction with the extraordinary Meghan, they will begin to inculcate many of those desires. And I'm sure that Diana's communicating with her youngest son, in a non-corporeal way, and giving him moments of inspiration. Was one of the things that she wanted to do, which didn't happen um, because she was because she died, was to move to a house in Montecito, which she was going to see. It's just that her death stopped her going to see it. And the reason being is that they could be secure, and that the boys could do, obviously they would spend not perpetual time there. They would be there and then also come back to the United Kingdom to be part of the royal family. But so that they could be sportif, because they loved windsurfing and rollerblading and bicycling and da 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 da. So it's fascinating that the two of them have ended up there.
Very. Those when I had that experience last summer of connecting with her as my muse, I had to ask her what happened with Charles. What was that about? Because when I put a post up in the Silver Tent, one of the biggest things that in the way that our members responded was around that real betrayal of Charles. So I really wanted to hear from Diana what that was about. And I was absolutely blown away by the response that I got. And I'd be really interested to know what you think about this, because what I experienced from her was she said, oh, it was nothing. I mean, she wasn't talking as the little Diana, but Diana in her fullness. And she said, I knew what I was doing. I went to that family. I chose that family in order to have that stage. You don't need to worry about him or the relationship that they had in the bigger scheme of things. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. But it was not what I was anticipating at all.
Well, you were talking, I feel, intuitively, you were speaking to the mature soul that has been through untold healing in that area that we refer to as being heaven or the source. Because it didn't matter, but in flesh it did.
Absolutely.
And it was really the wheel of fortune turning, wasn't it? Wheel of destiny turning. And no doubt, Diana loved Charles very deeply. It's just that he didn't love her. And Charles is an amazing man. I mean, I have so many things to say about the man who is now our king in the United Kingdom. He's an extraordinary man. But at the same time, as we know, that he is a sensitive. And he's always found it very difficult to live his public, formal existence and to be the sensitive. So he's been able to express it in very personal ways to do with the creation of Highgrove, the organic farm, all of his work through the Prince's Trust, which is now the King's Trust. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on, the extraordinary projects that he's inaugurated around the world. So he's able to express it thus. And will be, is one of the great peacemakers of our world, or certainly of the European continent. But at the same time, being a sensitive, he just didn't know how to deal with the volubility of Diana, because she was so transparent about her feelings. If she was felt like crying, she would cry, and if she got out of the bed the wrong way, meaning that sounds a little bit ridiculous, but if she was exercised by something, she would speak it. And he had learned over the years that you locked that away. It's like those moments that Harry has spoken about and written about, that when Charles went to him and announced Mummy's dead, that the reassuring gesture was that Charles put his hand on Harry's knee and then left the room.
Wow.
And really, the boy just wanted, Harry just wanted to be hugged.
Mm.
And he didn't cry until quite recently when he went through therapy. He just held it all in, which was also a copying of Dad. It was, yeah, I mean, being I had very the nature of my family interactions with the royal family. There is always a divide. There is always the formality and the informal. But I adored the Queen, and I have many stories about meeting her as a child, informally and formally. And she was extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. And of course, my parents died in untimely deaths very young, so they were very affected. Both the Queen and the Philip were very affected. I still have the letters that they wrote, you know, and they're very, very, very touching about how, you know, the Queen writes that I have tears in my eyes because I know that we have lost an immensely dear friend, and this is your father, you know, etc., etc. So I know that there was huge capacity for love, but of course the role,
Mm.
or, you know, and particularly because of her father being so sensitive, you know, George VI being so sensitive, that she was always warding off all of the thought projection that great people receive from all and sundry. You know, can you imagine what that's like? In our roles, we experience, because we step forward and put our heads above the parapet, we stand in the center of the stage and we conduct ourselves meaningfully to bring about change as lovingly as possible. And there are people that are going to project onto one. But I mean, for example, when I published this, the death threats that I received,
Mm.
and the police had to get involved and also, you know, blah, 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 blah. So I hope that makes some sort of sense of being able to guard oneself. And
Mm.
Charles was part of that wheel of fortune turning at that particular time of chronology, where his sensitivity was bullied out of him, except it dove deep within him into the depths of the chthonic subconscious experiences. And he's changed, and I'm sure that if he had the opportunity to speak it, and of course it's still a very raw nerve, meaning Diana's still a very raw nerve within the family, and particularly vis-a-vis Camilla, that if he could speak it, he would say that it was a time of immense learning
Yeah.
Mm.
for
And
him.
also, you know, maybe that all had to happen in order for her to be the woman that she became
Oh,
when everything
unquestionably,
happened.
unquestionably. There is no one to blame, you see. It happened in the way that it happened. And
Mm.
we human beings can be ugly as well as very beautiful. And particularly when sexuality and emotionality and possession is involved, we can become really dark forces. But it all happened, as we see, to teach us all because they are iconic. So they taught us all through the antics of what was going on, including, you know, the private tapes that were made of their telephone conversations. All of that was to literally exorcise any of the hidden aspect of psyche within the established order of what royalty is all about. As we see, you know, and when Charles and Camilla eventually pass, I hope not tomorrow, William and Kate will take over, and they will become more like the European households. I mean, we are in Europe, but you know what I mean. The
Mm.
Danish household, for example, you know. So I believe that all that we can refer to, all of our history, that it's showing us exactly how we can become more emotionally intelligent, and that we need to cease blaming and judging and see ways of being able to open unconditional love. Because as we all know, blaming and judging somebody just creates bitterness and more treachery.
But how wonderful that she can be or is a role model, not just for what she um, became, but the fact that it came out of such a such a difficult experience. Like if we all took that on, like the worst things that happen to us can be the very best things when you get to the other side of that, when you get that learning and then step up. And I think that can, that can really be like a light of hope for people, can't it? Particularly women maybe that have been through similar situations or are going through similar situations. Who knows who they might become out the other side of that when they grab hold of their courage
Yes.
and move
Yes.
forward like Diana.
Absolutely, and which is what I meant earlier on when I said that she was victimized, but she never believed that she was a victim.
Yes, that's amazing.
And, I often use the phrase prisoner of Windsor as a metaphoric device, but actually she was always working towards liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And so she was canny, I think is a great word for darling Diana. She was emotionally so piquant, so you could actually feel her feeling everything. She could walk into a huge room for a formal occasion and see everybody clearly. So she knew how she could spend time over here, and if she spent time over there, it would be exhausting, because people would suck from her. So she was always, she was always gracious, of course, and loving, but she would find ways of being able to allow herself to be enervated and empowered and inspired so that she could serve further everybody. But she could just simply
It's an amazing gift.
survey the room immediately.
Mm.
Highly intuitive, you see. Highly, highly.
One of the things that came out after your experience, Francesca, when Diana came through as your muse, and we were talking about it afterwards, was that you felt that the silver tent was supposed to be part of her legacy. And when I spoke to Stewart about this, he said, no, her legacy is her boys. But I wonder whether that conversation could be opened up a little bit, because what would she love for the silver tent, for the women in the silver tent, and for other women beyond, to be bringing forth from what she brought into the world? So not her legacy in the way that her boys are her legacy, but a continuation, an influence that's being drawn through like a fil rouge.
Well, I think for me, what I see is when she came through to me, I saw her as the message, and I feel that that's the same in the silver tent, because one of the things that I run is taking people through an intuitive course to find what their legacy is. What's their real heart's calling, even if they're over 70 years old, they might not have known. So in a way, it's like emulating her, taking that deep sense of her love, her ability to relate so powerfully and equally with others, but to stand up for herself with courage and following that trajectory. So that, to me, I guess what I'm seeing is that her legacy through the silver tent is encouraging us to kind of follow in her footsteps.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what I meant earlier by the dots suddenly. I was working very intuitively, very psychic, but the dots suddenly all connected. And I'd love to refer just to the context that darling Karen just mentioned. I feel that my response, oh, the boys are the legacy. I feel that my response in that moment was to do with the specific nature of the intimate conversation that Karen and I was having, because I sort of I heard this. I thought, what? No, because I don't believe that's the only part. That's what Diana, the Voice of Change, is all about. It's part of her legacy. Um, I would like to say that the Diana Award organization was also part of her legacy. I feel it's become distorted because they approached me a few years ago and I shared the book with the CEO. And I was told that it was completely inappropriate that I'd written the book because all I was doing is cashing in on the reputation of Diana. And I said, but you haven't even read the book. And I,
Mm,
gave the person a book and said, aren't you going on holiday tomorrow? Take the book with you, read it.
mm,
Because I feel that you'll see that it's a book for the women of the world. It's a book for the women and the men of the world, not the men and the women, but the women and the men of the world. It begins with love and it ends with love. And I feel that this is what Diana wants us to feel. So there are many tributaries to her legacy. And, although we've only just met, I feel deep within my heart, deep within me, that thank you, Karen, for bringing this about. Because I feel Francesca, and I hear what she's saying, and I completely concur. I believe that the silver tent is, for me, silver has always been the electrical frequency of the soul. And so, whenever I saw Diana, she had this huge aura, and there were many colors, but actually silver was the primary color that was always around her immediate etheric sheath, and then the other colors would dance in, whatever the occasion or the mood, or the absolute sense of what she was communicating. So absolutely, it's about Diana, the voice of change, as a thesis was to bring the women of the world together in communion. That was the first precept. The second, so there could be genuine sharing, empathic sharing, just as we saw Diana sharing. And of course, as you both know more well than I, that when women get together, they share in a wonderfully ordinary way about their lives and their men and their children and their jobs and what's going on within their bodies and etc etc, and of course how you are all desperately worried about what's going on in the world, what's going on in the Gaia at the moment, because there's so much disturbance. So being able to share and then to move into constructive union where disempowerments are turned into empowerments, where, as we saw with Darling Diana, victim became victor.
mm,
And that we're impressed by, the other extraordinary women who we hold as icons in the world. I mean, the immediate person that comes to mind is Marianne Williamson or Oprah. Marianne, I spoke to about this, and she said, "I'll be there. If you want me to be there, darling, I'll be there." Haven't spoken to Oprah. Would love to, but they're just two names that are iconic in the sense of the journeys that they've been through and how they've broken as systems busters. They've broken through all of the negative commentary that sometimes occur from the men. So yes, I mean yes, and I as a man serve the divine feminine.
And that's so beautifully clear in the book, that
mm,
your understanding and your love of the divine feminine just absolutely shines through. And then what I thought just then is, I think another legacy that I'm picking up as a potential through the silver tent, and not just through the silver tent, in any communities of women, is that it's very easy to look at Diana and go, yes, but she had that standing, she was beautiful, she was from that family, that background, blah blah blah. But actually, because she treated everybody as an equal, that's all we need to do. Each one of us, if we treat everybody as an equal and engage like Diana did and does in that relational way, then actually we will shift the global culture to one of love. We will bring the feminine up to balance with the masculine, won't we? We only have to turn up, kind of like Diana, but in that simple way of treating everybody as equal and really relating powerfully and clearly with them. And that kind of really touches my heart.
Totally, totally. And the way that I perceive all the richness of what you've just shared is that she believed in the sacred in everyone. And even the naughty ones, she would say, but if we show them sacredness, they will be reminded. They will remember the sacred within. They've just forgotten. And all they need is to be remembered. And one of the things that we don't know, although I talk about it in the book, is that being in the United Kingdom, whenever she wasn't engaged in a formal occasion in the evening, she would jump into the car and drive to, with her detective, obviously, but drive to a hospital and just run into the reception and say, "Is there anybody you want me to sit with?" Can you imagine at 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the evening, if you're a receptionist in the Royal
Incredible.
Marston or wherever, you know? And suddenly she bounds in jeans and a sweatshirt saying, "Is there anybody I can sit with?" And hundreds of people she sat with. One or two of them I got to know and interviewed for the book. And their stories were extraordinary. And often they were wonderfully ordinary people who weren't necessarily book learned, but were immensely courageous and sensitive because of the difficulties or the endeavors that they'd been through in life. And they would say, "Was she an angel?"
Yeah.
So we would talk about what that means. And I remember one of them said, "You know, I can still feel her. When she put her hand on my arm, an electrical bolt moved through my body, and whatever was wrong with me was healed in that moment. And I still feel that electricity moving whenever I tune into her, and I have photographs all over my living room. You know, whenever I tune into her, I feel that energy. I mean, how extraordinary is that? Supernatural,
It
but
is.
actually really natural.
And I'm kind of getting that she's like a tuning fork.
Absolutely, absolutely. A tuning fork for the Divine Mother.
Yeah.
That's why she needed to go in the way that she went. I don't know if you've got to that part in the book where I explain her death.
Yes, I've read it all now.
Oh, you have, right. So, I mean, that's really extraordinary, isn't it? And the fact that in Roman times, the Pont de Almar was the Temple of Diana.
Yes, yes. Really quite extraordinary. I mean, there's a whole other conversation like that we could go through that portal, but probably this isn't the place for that quite yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes, quite
Well,
extraordinary.
it's interesting because what also feels, I mean, with one funny little connection, that part of what you wrote in my copy of the book, Stewart, is the path is woven with silver, and here we are connecting around Diana and the silver ten. How perfect is that?
Is he psychic? Is he not? Isn't that? I didn't. That's extraordinary.
Isn't it? Isn't it?
That is quite
Um,
something.
and it does also feel as though there is real scope for, well, before I mention what I feel there's real scope for, is one little quote from the book, which you highlighted as well, Francesca, which is so powerful. Our job today is to reconnect with the wonder, with the magic, and with the enchantment. And it feels as though very much this conversation has reflected that. And also this need for, so many women have so much to bring into the world and so much light to bring into the world. And sometimes the lack of gravitas, the lack of confidence and presence, and the lack of grounding in the voice really holds that back. So it does feel as though, everything that you do, Stewart, in terms of really enabling that, and obviously I've seen you time and time and time again really help bring that voice through, to bring that power and that presence through. And it really feels as though there's an opportunity here for us to maybe put something together, especially for some of the ladies in the silver tent, who would find this valuable. So I think, again, that's something that we could potentially explore if you're both open to it.
Oh, I think what you're saying is just, I'm very moved and, to be part of it because I'm very humbled by being in the presence of powerful feminine energy, because I know the import that you carry within you. And as you've just referred, some of it can be purblind or can be hidden, but now is the time for it to come forth. One of the other features that I didn't mention about the point of stimulation for the book is that all of that time, this is 2015, 2016, I was doing a lot of work with four extraordinary actresses in Hollywood who are A-listers, so I won't mention their names, but they were all saying, what do we do about Harvey? Meaning, do we step forward because they'd all been compromised by Harvey Weinstein to the point of nearly being raped and so forth on the casting couch? What do we do? And I said, well, you step forward and you speak your truth. But how do we do that? And then one of them said, who's very smart, said, well, wait a minute, you helped Diana. How do we, what did you do with her? And then I said, well, what we did was this. And they said, well, you must write the book, It all happened at the same time. So, and then, the book came out and then it did what it did. And then it sort of moved into what books do. They get a little bit covered by dust. And this, in my experience of you both sharing this with me, is an immense awakening. It is absolutely so crucial. And, this is not Diana, but one of the aspects of my work is often to go into conflict areas in the world and to bring in some form of peace through sound. And this all really started, I've just been led in this direction. I don't ask for it, it just comes to me. One of the extraordinary experiences that I had was with Mo Mowlam, who was a Labour parliamentarian, and she was right at the centre of trying to find the peace talks in Northern Ireland. And she came to me because of fatigue and that her voice was severely hoarse. But being the natural interpreter of life that Mo was, we fell into a completely different conversation about her totality holistically and what, that she was not really looking after herself in terms of her food intake and her fluid intake, that she was overweight and although she was, wonderful, loving relationship with her partner, with her husband. There were all sorts of problems going on because she was, being a parliamentarian that she was, she did have a great support of Tony Blair. So I actually went with her twice to Northern Ireland to help her empower. I would upcharge her, and then she would go in and meet the Sinn Féin. And they, gosh, she was mama to them. That energy, that iconic energy of how to bring peace out of conflict. And of course, that conflict was so raw, wasn't it, in Northern Ireland, that she was actually able to bring about this extraordinary change of circumstance. So there are many different aspects of engagement within the nature of what the arousal of the divine feminine is at this time. The irony, of course, about Mo's destiny, very similar to Diana, is that as soon as the peace conflict had been resolved, we discovered she had a huge brain tumor, and within a very short period of time, she was dead. So it was, she'd gone back into source. She came to do what she came to do, and then it was, bye guys, I'm leaving. And she was back into source. And maybe, I don't know, I haven't tuned into her since then. Yeah. I was interviewed the other day and somebody said, it's very interesting that a lot of the very powerful women that you worked with, they were engaged in war and they're all dead.
That's quite a thought, Stewart.
And I said, but I'm not responsible.
Oh.
It happened to be that way because they come and they flare. These extraordinary women come and flare and do something outrageously wonderful in a revolutionary way upon our planetary stage, and then they go.
Yeah.
And that kind of makes sense too, doesn't it, that they would.
Yes.
Yeah. And now I believe there's a time of changing, do you see? There's a time of difference because of what's taking place in the world. And one of the things that I'm very aware of, in particularly in the United States, where that embraced the book extraordinarily, and I was met by the press in the most wonderful, wonderful way, and did, I don't know, something like 250 press interviews and was on national TV 5 times, and my publicist was saying, "Oh my God, this is so rare! Oh my God, everybody loves you!" And I said, "Well, it's not me, it's Diana." And one of the things that came out of that was that I recognized that more the women wanted to tell me what their experience of Diana was, rather than to hear what it was like to be intimate with her. It's very interesting that they had all had outpourings. And in fact, Harry picked this up because one of the things that was difficult for him as that young boy when she died was that everybody else was weeping and sharing what they felt, but nobody wanted to listen to what he felt, so he locked it away. And I would imagine that William also did the same thing. And maybe, that comes out in other ways through the love of his children and the love of his wife. I mean, I'm talking of William. However, the point that I was going to make is that the healing that can be detonated is absolutely vast in the sense of the fact that she's still with us on that level. And that if we can open up the channels through the silver tent, it will encourage those people who are still held in trauma to breathe out. Was one of the things that I noticed at that moment when we heard the world went into startle reflex, and people haven't breathed out since then
That's
on
an
a very deep
amazing.
sonic level, and it's time now to breathe out.
Mm.
And it's so clear in the silver tent how many of our women were traumatized by that.
Mm.
Absolutely devastated. And not just, we've got a lot of women in the US as well as in the UK, and just it is a global outpouring, and it's really interesting to see that in the silver tent. So it would be lovely to take this a step further. And yeah, I mean, I just feel incredibly honored that she turned up for me, last summer, and now the whole message comes from her.
Yes, yes,
Mm.
yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
very.
This is a remarkable meeting that we're having, I feel, deep within my being. But what's also interesting is that as soon as you both asked if we could do this, and I said, of course, um, that I suddenly received emails from women all over the world saying, could I have a conversation with you? I would love you to come on to my podcast or whatever the thing was to talk about Diana, because I feel you channel Diana. She's with you. And I haven't fulfilled all of those engagements yet. I'm working through them. But it's interesting that there's an awakening. So I feel Diana is very with us, whereas there's been a sort of sleeping for a period of time. But now there's a huge shift that she wants to bring about within our hearts.
Mm.
It's the time, isn't it?
It is the time.
It's the time, yes.
Yes.
It's absolutely that. Very,
Mm.
very exciting and very inspiring.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. I'm deeply, deeply moved and inspired by by all of your revelations, both of you. I hope I haven't spoken too much. It's just,
Oh, Stuart,
No.
it's just been wonderful.
oh, bless you.
Wonderful.
And I would like to reassure anybody that is thinking about, if we put something together, thinking about coming, you're not automatically going to be taken away to source straight away. You
That would be great. I'd like to double check that too.
Yes.
No, this is, I mean, her story was, my life is always for the living.
Yes.
And this is a story to be lived, not a story to be told, she would always say, And I feel that's very impactful. It's, her grace was, from a spirit point of view, that she needed to go because of the immense effect that she had on billions and billions of people. I mean, I can't remember the statistics in the book, but it's something like 5.5 billion people
Totally.
wept, which was more than 2/3 of the population of the planet at that time. Of course, now we're 7.5 to nearly 8 billion. But that, as we know, something unusual was released in her passing, that great wave of Shakti moving through us to lead us to an archetypal reckoning, a spiritual audit, which of course many people experienced. And then we all went back to sleep. It's
Mm.
rather like, the other world events such as that come to my mind, such as 9/11. And then, of course, quite recently in this kingdom, the passing of Elizabeth from an archetypal point of view. And I felt that that happened far too fast. I don't mean her dying. I mean the aftermath, so to speak, because we needed to mourn and mourn and mourn and mourn and mourn this extraordinary woman. But it all happened because our lives are so busy in a cellular way that we are, you know, entrapped by image and fast moving icons that we didn't go deep into. And there will be a time when that residue needs to come forth. And I feel that Diana is one of the orchestrators from a celestial point of view of what that healing is all about.
Well, just thinking about, you know, the kind of tagline of the Silver Tent, creating ripples of influence, shifting the global culture to one of love. And Diana just sent out ripples of influence all on her own, didn't she? Billions of them. But I suddenly got this sense that all the women in the Silver Tent and beyond, when we start opening up and creating ripples of influence together synergistically, it'll be like being an army in step, won't it? Like, you know,
Absolutely.
that
Yes.
energy will just really start cracking some of those masculine bastions and
Yes.
the
Yes.
feminine will
Yes.
emerge.
Oh, totally. You know, and one of my really strong convictions, having been in the situation when I heard His Holiness the Dalai Lama 15 years ago say the next chapter of history will be written by the women and the girls. I feel that that's what you're talking about, you know.
I think so.
Absolutely. And that we must never underestimate the extraordinary healing that will be as you rise up, as you find your voices metaphorically and literally, and you rise up to say, no, we will not, and step forward as in unity, you know, in unison, in symphony. It will create waves and waves where the men will just be, wow, what happened?
And then their hearts will just go.
Their hearts will open, yeah.
Mm.
You know, and this isn't necessarily public information at the moment, but from a confidential point of view, I've been extensively involved since 2023 with that is taking place in Gaza. Because I occasionally work for the UN, where I'm used as an alternative workshop host, where I go into war-torn situations like the Ukraine or indeed Gaza and run workshops for aid workers who are traumatized and full of PTSD as a result of what they've experienced. You know, and they're extraordinary human beings with great courage, but internally their own spirits are wasted by the horrors that they see. And I've been twice to Gaza. Extraordinary experiences. Wow. Diana was there with me, loving, 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 loving. And now that I was put in contact with four of the liberated hostages. So we've contacted, we've been in firm contact, and they're extraordinary people. And what I'm hearing is that the women of Israel are coming together because after all, Judaism is essentially a patriarchal religion,
Mm.
and there's great separation in the hybrid nature with the Hasidic Jewish peoples, this disintegration, or rather this separation or division between men and women, that there is this unified force coming together, and it's the women of Israel joining hands with the women of Palestine that are going to bring about a cessation of violence.
Mm.
It's very embryonic because obviously there's a tremendous amount of debris in the foreground, which is filled full of darkness because of the gross perpetration of terrorism. But at the same time, where there is love, love always conquers.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, that feels like a really beautiful spot for us to round off our conversation, doesn't it? And thank you both for a really, truly extraordinary conversation and the beautiful synergies just weaving together, and the opportunity to see so much of what can come about from this and feel it. And as we said earlier, Diana has very much been here with us the whole time. You can feel her viscerally. And so really bringing that into another realm and more ripples and allowing that to flow out. So thank you both for being here. Thank you both for everything that you are and everything that you do in the world, because you're both extraordinary beings.
Oh, Karen, thank you for making this possible, and Stewart for just being so present today and being up for this. Honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Thank you.
And similarly, you know, from the deep part of my heart, the depth of my soul, this has been a remarkable conversation. So I thank you both for inviting me and holding me in the way that you have. It's allowing me to be who I am and to be a conduit for the wonderful being that we know as Diana. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And of course, obviously, something has been christened, so we're going to do something.
It has, yes. And I think that's a watch this space thing, isn't it? So we will confer and put something special together, unique. Much love to you both. Much love to everybody that's catching up with this, listening or watching. And thank you for being here too. So, and for now, thank you, Diana, and thank you.
Bless you.
Leave it at that for now. Thank
Au
you.
revoir. Au revoir.
Au revoir.
Thank you so much. Bye.